One. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to True Crime with the Sarge. I'm your host, Joseph Jackalone. Before we get started tonight, I just want to thank everybody for coming out and watching the live show. And if you're watching this on the replay, I appreciate that too. Wow, we just jumped to 65 people right off the bat. So with me tonight is John Ray, Shannan Gilbert Family Attorney. He needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. His information about his law firm is in the description. Make sure you check that out. And John Ray has kept the Shannan Gilbert case alive for a better part of 13 years when everyone else had just kind of moved on. So he deserves credit for that in so many aspects. And tonight we're going to welcome John back to the show. John, thanks for coming back on.
Oh, my pleasure, Jeff.
So before we get started into some of the real stuff from last week, where you had your press conference with the Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison, you had a couple of affidavits that you presented. But before we can get into those affidavits, would you mind explaining to the audience what an affidavit really is, like, and how it's used and why it's used?
Sure. An affidavit is a piece of paper, and on it are the words that are sworn to by the person who signs it. It's of no value, of no external use whatsoever, until and unless it is filed with some formal governmental agency, such as a court of law or a district attorney's office or the task force, the police, and the like. Then it becomes binding basically on the affiant, the person. That's what we call the person who signs it. And it's signed with a sworn statement that it's true, and it's notarized to make it effective. So once that person files that or has it filed with an authority, they're giving a statement under the penalties of perjury, meaning they could be charged with a very serious crime if they lied in the document. So, I mean, people do lie. That's why we have oaths. But it's unlikely that when people give affidavits such as the ones that we have taken, that they have any motive to lie, and they're not facing charges themselves. So it has this. They ought to have, and they usually do, the ring of truth. That's their whole purpose.
Right. So now these affidavits, and they have to be corroborated, right? So the police department now has to go and interview these people and try to find out some more information and try to gather evidence. Is that what the next steps are going to be?
I would hope that the police will try to corroborate each of the affidavits that we've provided. There are, quite a few facts associated with each affidavit of the two, and those facts, they are objective facts, that is to say, or objective allegations of facts, and they can be or not be corroborated. Many times when you're dealing with old information, such as would be in these affidavits, they're dating back to 1996 and 2009, respectively. Memories fade, people's perceptions change, things get mixed up, but the police should be looking to make sure that the core of what these people swore to is truthful and useful. So they corroborate all the collateral evidence that's contained in those statements and the things surrounding those statements to see if they can be used, and to see if the people are being truthful. In both affidavits that I obtained, in the first one, not only did I qualify the woman who was giving the affidavit as being truthful by tests and questions and cross-examinations, as it were, but also we met with two detectives, dyed-in-the-wool homicide detectives who know what they're doing, and myself with the witness to attempt to establish the witness's credibility. They will now have to follow that up with asking questions of the other people involved in the circumstances. The same process was true for the second affidavit of the taxi driver. And in that case, the commissioner himself, after I had qualified this woman credibility-wise and taken the affidavit, the commissioner himself came, met with her and with me at length, and also examined her to determine credibility. So they've been vetted pretty well, these two witnesses and their affidavits. Now it's to the police's job to gather up the evidence, put together the little pieces to see what fits and what doesn't.
Right. I had a chance to speak to the police commissioner the other day, and I had asked him about this. And he actually, the one case that really sticks with me is the one with the maybe Karen Vagata in it. And, how he said that they have already identified the former detective that was with her that night, and he's already spoken to her. Of course, he couldn't go into any length or any description or any information, but they are definitely working on that angle because that is like the big corroboration part right there.
Yeah, that certainly in the case of the swingers, that detective is an important part of that story. I don't know whether he'll be truthful or not about what happened, or half truthful sometimes. I really don't know. I don't know the man. But when I was able to show the witness pictures of various men with the same name, and and the same occupation even, and she went through several of them, said, no, that's not him, that's that, and then bam, that's him. And that the corroboration and the stories around that corroboration, by way of her picking him out, they were strong, including the history surrounding that man. So, my firm, we obtained all of that, gave it to the police. So, yeah, that's there. But there's another interesting new corroboration that has occurred, and it's something that you never know where these things come from. But should I be going too far into this at this point, or did you want
No,
to?
I mean, listen, we love breaking news and stuff. So, yeah, go right ahead.
Well, one of the things that the woman said, the witness that is, the swinger who went with the policeman to Rexy Ruman's house, was that Osa Ellerup, the wife, did not want to have sex with anybody. She stayed on the main floor, and when the witness offered her sex, she said no. The witness believed, it was her belief after the fact, that the reason for that refusal by Osa was because the witness is African American. That's her belief. But now an interesting new fact has emerged that kind of, I think, works in the way of corroboration. And that is that Robert Macedonio is the lawyer for Mrs. Ellerup in the divorce case. He has now put himself forward, gone beyond his role, and put himself forward as her lawyer, generally speaking, including on this case. So more power to him. And what he did was he announced on television when he was interviewed just 2 or 3 days ago that there's no way that Mrs. Ellerup would have participated in the activities that John Ray, that's me, spoke about. And that's because Mrs. Ellerup was pregnant at the time that these events allegedly occurred, which was in February of 1996. So he came forth with that lovely, poignant piece of evidence. Well, now think about it. Two things emerge from that. One, that's a perfectly rational explanation and consistent with the witness's statement that Mrs. Ellerup didn't want to have sex that night because she was pregnant. And that tends to, therefore, establish the credibility of that affidavit on that point. But it also does a second thing, in my estimation. It now gives you a clearer explanation as to why Karen Vagata was brought in the car with the couple that evening to the Huerman house. You see, Mrs. Ellerup wasn't going to have sex because she was pregnant. So they needed another partner. And that's what the driver detective did. He got another partner, and that was Regatta, and brought her with him. So it explains the threesome aspect of the people in the car. Something also, I don't know if it was mentioned in the public forum, but a very peculiar fact that the witness remembered was that Regatta, Karen, was bent over and leaning to one side as they drove, and in an odd position. But what the witness did not know was that Regatta had been in a car accident recently and had injured her back. And so these kind of little peculiar facts that pop up in an affidavit, they tend to either discount or include the credibility of someone. Think about the pregnancy issue. It emerges in two very strong ways as being very consistent with that lady's testimony. So I just thought I'd mention it. Thank you.
No,
Thanks, Rob Macedonio. I really appreciate it.
I mean, all of this is like has been like a whirlwind, right? This last week, everyone was saying, "Oh, there's no information coming out," and then all of a sudden, boom! All this stuff started coming out last week with the presser and having the police commissioner there, which gives this all the next level, right? Did you ever have a press conference before where there was a member of the police force there with you?
I've had press conferences innumerable back for 41 years of my practice. The very first week that I opened my practice, we ended up with a press conference, the very first case I ever had. So it stretches a long way. And I'm in all those press conferences, and gosh, I can't count them. I would say no, I never did.
Wow. So that adds a whole different level to what we're actually hearing about. And this case has been treated much differently now than it has in the previous couple of administrations also.
Yeah, the approach on this case has radically changed since the entrance of Rodney Harrison, all to the good, not just because he's helped to qualify and verify the work and the production from that work that I've done, but also, I mean, so that's a fairly selfish point of view, but also objectively, he's made the needle move where it had been staying kind of front and center at zero for 12 years. And in short order, using creative techniques and technology, he and the task force, but led by him in great part, accomplished a great deal. So, plaudits. And just that he, when he met with me, right after he got sworn in, one of the first things he did was contact me and say, let's talk. When he did, he said at a meeting with myself and his detectives here in my office, sitting right in that chair, he said, I'm going to release the tapes. I think he took the detectives by surprise, but he did that. And he was faithful to his word. He did release the tapes, although the detectives, I think, distorted the tapes when they held a press conference on May 13th, 2022, where they played only short portions of the tape and put up distorted pictures of what occurred to Shannan Gilbert and the night she disappeared. But that's another story for another time. Rodney, nonetheless, made sure that tape was released as promised. He's kept his promises, done a good job. He's a great guy, and we've become really good friends.
Yes, he's done a wonderful job, and like I said, and let's hope that continues. So let's circle back to the affidavits. The one I want to focus in on first is the one that we've been talking about, the one with the swingers, and that for unfortunately this club has been closed down now for a number of years, so they can't get any information about the the posting and stuff like that. But Has there been any contact with anybody that was in the clubs that hanging out in those days that might have contacted you since then to try to say, yes, I remember seeing this address on the wall, or maybe I was at that house before too?
Yes. Uh,
Oh, terrible time to go
Can
blank on this thing. Yep.
you hear me?
Yep. Yeah. You froze up for a second there.
All righty.
There you
Those,
go.
you good?
Yep. We're good.
All right. Those two witnesses that gave the affidavits weren't the only witnesses who had contacted me over the course of time that uh, whose information I gave to the police through Rodney. There were two others as well who I hope the police are investigating, who did not give statements, under oath, but did explain to me what occurred to them. And there were other witnesses as well, circumstantial witnesses, who've come forward. And we have a very key witness who's come forward recently, which I will not reveal today yet. We're not ready to do that. But we have others. For example, two different witnesses, both of whom rather were actual frequent customers at La Trapeze, frequent club members, and went there and have described in great detail what went on in that club, and what they told me. And they were not connected to the swinger witness that gave the affidavit. They told me things that were the witnesses as to what occurred. So um, the witness that we had was telling the truth about that in detail. And by the way, some of the things that were corroborated, I won't tell you them all, it might take too long, but some of the things that matter that were corroborated were that there were a significant number of police officers or police who were members of that swingers club who were there. And that's why the club never gets busted.
I lost you again, John.
That those kinds of horrors would occur, and yet nothing ever occurred legally to them, as far as I could tell from the witnesses anyway. And they were protected. Also, the description of the rooms in the place was consistent with what I heard from the witness. The description of the food that was served there.
Darn. All right. Let's see what happens when he's coming back. I don't know if you can hear me, John, but you froze up. You guys hear me? You guys hear me, or is it just John froze up? Okay. So
Wi-Fi.
as I'm, oh, you froze up again, John.
Yeah, did you hear anything? I stopped talking because of that.
Yeah, yeah. You stopped right after the. You said that there were lots of police officers in the club, and that they never got raided, so to speak, and that's the reason why that they had gone on so long.
Excuse me. Yeah, there was food that was served that was corroborated by the differing witnesses, and there were other circumstances as well. The big room where there was a lot of sex going on um, amongst couples. But another thing that emerged was that in order to belong to this club, you had to be a member, and to go in there, you had to bring a partner, but you weren't allowed to leave unless you left with the same partner you came with. And they had a rule like that. So they actually sometimes prevented people from leaving until they worked that out. So that it was a place that was kind of second to, what was it called?
Okay. It seems as if Optimum Online on Long Island to do us a number on us, right, Jay? Jay is always complaining about that. So as we wait for John to come back in. So yeah, so I'm gonna ask a couple of questions. I see brutally honest. We're gonna get that question in there because we're definitely gonna circle back because at the presser, John had made a statement about somebody that was in there. So it's going to be. I'm gonna definitely follow up with that. And let's hope he comes back in just in a few minutes. There, I'm just gonna send him a quick text. Oh, he jumped out. Okay. All right. So I was waiting for John to come back in. Uh, Yeah, we're definitely gonna get into the Oak Beach stuff. I want to get into the Joe Brewer part. I want to get into the Peter Hackett stuff and then see what happens. But it's interesting, right? So we're seeing that they're getting some information. I like the fact that they're getting he's getting phone calls on this stuff. So it's actually pretty interesting to see what, let's hope he can get back in. So just hang out. Of course, we got up to 221 people in here, and then he had to freeze up on us there. So let's just hope we can try and send him a text quick. Just bear with me 1 second. Technology, right? Yeah, Tom. It seems as if they have a couple of things right there, right? So um, the stuff with the daughter, I mean with the wife, excuse me, and the pregnancy, I don't know, but let's hope he can get back on and maybe we can ask him a little bit more about that. Yeah, he's not going anywhere. We'll wait. Okay, good. Hopefully that he'll be back in a few minutes. I just sent him a text. I don't know if he's rebooting the computer or what have you. We'll see. Anyway, so I have some new plans coming up. Here he is. Hang on a second.
What's going on? Is it me or you?
Okay, no, I think it's definitely on your end. You got bounced. You keep on freezing up. They can hear me, but you just freeze out, and then you got bounced out of the room.
We have
So,
terrible Wi-Fi here in Miller Place.
yeah, is it
We
Optimum
really do.
Online?
I tried, but I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Forgive me.
That's all right. Sorry. So we were picking up. We were still talking about you had said they had gotten corroboration with the food, the rooms, and they had to leave with the same person they came with, and and then you froze up.
Yeah. There's, and then I talked about it was a club that was kind of a sister club to what was it called? Plato's Retreat, which was also a kind of a sexual morass club in New York.
So, I mean, when you look at these two affidavits, right? You have both individuals that really have nothing to gain by, only to the one with the swinger thing, only to lose by if this happens to be Karen Bagata, and that's the last time she's seen with them. So it's kind of interesting in that respect that they come out and put themselves in this position. Have you found that? Have you found that when other people have now reached out to you that they kind of put themselves right in the middle of this stuff? Is that what you're seeing?
Who put? I'm not sure what your question is. I'm sorry.
Okay, like they're coming to you with information that they're actually saying, like, listen, I partook in these kind of activities and put themselves squarely in the crosshairs of maybe even law enforcement or their families or their wives or husbands or whatever.
Yeah, these people are brave to come forward, but they felt the compulsion that often occurs when you're involved in a traumatic event to have somebody listen to them, to have somebody hear what they have to say. And in this kind of a criminal situation where the crime is very unusual, it's a sexual criminal atmosphere. And in that atmosphere, women especially are completely traumatized. Even the sex workers that were in it were traumatized by their work, by the situation, by the nature of the crime. It's not like they were gun runners or yeah, I don't know, people doing assaults or robberies and the like. Where there's maybe there's a plan and there's a scheme and so forth. It's much deeper than that. It's sexual. And when it's sexual, it's more than personal. And the result is that women suffer from PTSD, as we know, rape trauma syndrome. They really don't do well in being victims of the crime, or even those participating in it, and then in a sense being victims in their own right of the crime. So what happens is they don't want to talk to the police. They don't want to come forward to any authority. They don't trust the structure. They fear them, and for good reason, I guess, in many cases. So when they find a place to come, like to me, it works out, and I can help them, and at the same time help the case. And I do both.
Right. There was something you mentioned, a name at the press conference. I'm going to bring it up now. I don't know how much you can talk about it, but I think a lot of it went over the media's head. You mentioned that you took, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said you took a deposition from Joe Brewer earlier in the day of the press conference.
Yes, I took Joe Brewer's testimony again on that day that we held the press conference. The Brewer's testimony came first, and then Rodney and I put together the press conference rather quickly on that day. So it was a hustle to do both, but I did take Joe Brewer's testimony as well.
Now, are we opening up a new front again in that whole Oak Beach angle? For those, would you explain who Joe Brewer was and how, what role he's playing in the Shannan Gilbert case?
Sure.
Just for those that are watching, because we're up to 250 people, and some might be unaware of who Joe Brewer is.
Joe Brewer was the John who was supposed to have been serviced by Shannan Gilbert on the early morning hours of May 1st, 2010, in Oak Beach, in his beach house. And Joe Brewer, therefore, is a significant witness in the disappearance of Shannan Gilbert.
And can you tell us anything about this deposition, or that's got to be kept on the down low kind of thing?
Well, I can't go into the details of the deposition, but what has been revealed and is on has also been publicly put forth, including by my adversary's papers filed in court, which then get published, are the transcripts of the testimonies, the prior testimony of Joe Brewer, and that's available so to the public, apparently. So Joe Brewer has also made statements through the press and through the police about his involvement, and that's discussable as well. But I wasn't satisfied with Joe Brewer's first round of testimony that I took years ago, before we had the 911 tapes of Shannan Gilbert, Brewer himself, of which there were 3, Miss Barbara Brennan, on whose door Shannan knocked, and Gus Coletti, on whose door Shannan knocked. So once I received those tapes, they significantly changed the approach that I would have had to learning from the witness what they knew, in this case Joe Brewer, and what he knew. And what we knew from the tapes significantly contradicted not only what Brewer had already said under oath, but what Brewer had also said to the public at various times. So, of course, now with the tapes, I needed to confront him again, and I did.
Okay, so that's what this was about. So what you found on the tapes, match it up to what he initially said, and then re-questioning him again. Is it almost like here's another chance for you to get out in front of this, or kind of tell us what's going on? Is that how it works?
Well, not really.
Okay.
Sure, the witness has the ability to try to get out in front of his own testimony, prior testimony. But on the other hand, he's in a position where if he's not very consistent, he's going to trap himself in a series of lies. And that's the kind of thing you look for when you take a deposition. So a deposition is, it can be used to gather information, which it's supposed to be used for, but it also can be used to cross-examine the witness, which it's allowed to be used for. And so I do both. And
Gotcha.
we have some very fascinating results.
Great. Now, so you met. Well, we know Gus Coletti has passed away, right? So you said, is her name? I know it's Brennan, but is the first name you said Maureen?
Barbara Brennan.
Oh, Barbara Brennan. Is she still living around the area, or is she?
No, Barbara Brennan moved to New Hampshire. She sold her house soon after these events, and I was able to take her affidavit from New Hampshire with a compromise that rather than making her come to Suffolk County, if she were willing to give me an affidavit after a thorough discussion by telephone with her that reflected our conversation, I would not therefore take her deposition. So I agreed to that, kept my word. She gave me an affidavit and kept her word.
Gotcha. And then so we got Joe Brewer, and then the last, unless there was somebody else, but there's another person, right? Peter Hackett, Dr. Peter Hackett, and we know you have. Is there a lawsuit going on between you and Peter Hackett? So I don't know if you can talk about anything like that, but he's another player in this whole thing.
The lawsuit, we brought a lawsuit for Shannan's death against Peter Hackett, Charles Peter Hackett, Dr. Charles Peter Hackett, osteopath. And that lawsuit continues as we speak, which is why I was able to take the testimony of Joe Brewer the other day in that lawsuit. But there are many others, witnesses whose testimonies I've taken. I've taken over 21 depositions at this point of various characters in that Oak Beach community regarding Shannan and her death. So they're all available. The work that I did there kind of all comes together. And there are other witnesses as well whose testimony we couldn't take for one reason or another, but they're still important. A lot of witnesses involved here, many of them not telling the truth.
And I just somebody had put in the chat because I had forgotten about him. Michael Pack, the driver.
Yes, Michael Pack is another player in this, one of several. And I took Pack's testimony years ago as well, around the same time I took Brewer's. And I took his testimony after I had already interviewed him at length. And then we went on the oath with that. And the same thing, I also then took his testimony recently in light of the fact that I was now allowed to use the 911 tapes that I had acquired through lawsuits against the police to get them, to get the tapes. There weren't lawsuits against the cops per se. There were lawsuits to get the tapes that the cops wouldn't give up. And so when I got them, the irony was the court said I have them, but I couldn't use them for any purpose without the approval of the court. So it took a while. And finally, when Rodney released the tapes, I was able to use them. And so I wanted to take Pack's testimony again, and I did. So we have both his and Brewer's testimony now a second time. We've taken Hackett's testimony 3 times.
So it's interesting to see how one decision about releasing the tapes can kind of like open up Pandora's box, so to speak, in so many different aspects for so many different people.
Yeah, I mean, it was the fight, the struggle with the police that I had for well over 2.5 years to get those tapes that kind of engendered the continuation of the controversy and not allowing it to die of a cold case death. And so that became sort of the heartbeat of my continuing work, was to fight to get those tapes. I had to go through 2 lawsuits, 2 appeals, and won at each step of the way. Slowly by slowly, we won. So it kept, it kept us on our toes and kept the case active for me. And I investigated the hell out of it, the case during that time. So it's what brought Michael Biden into the case. So it was a really important development. Yeah. And the original police officer handling it said, to my investigator, a retired homicide detective who was helping me, He said, John Ray will get those tapes over my dead body. Well, we got the tapes. So here we are.
And no funerals, right? So
Enough, the
no
officer who
funerals.
said that, I think we made friends, he and I, and I think we invited each other for a drink, and he retired, and he seems like a gentleman, nice guy.
Sometimes those are the way those things happen. Sometimes it's just politics at play and nothing else, nothing personal. But we all know how those things go.
Well,
So I
sometimes
had,
very personal,
right.
and you can't avoid that in the case. But for some police officers, in this case, it became very personal, one way or the other.
When I had a chance to talk to the commissioner the other day, I asked him, I said, if more evidence or information comes out, would you be willing to basically get the manner of death from undetermined changed to something else, homicide? And without skipping a beat, he said 1000%. And that's basically that's all you've been wanting them, right? For the police department just to be open to the fact that there is a possibility that this was not an accidental death as previously put forth by the police department.
Well, I'm more aggressive than that, to be
Okay.
honest with you. I will hope and expect that the police department, in coming back to these facts with new, fresh eyes and my work, that they will conclude what I have and what Dr. Michael Bodden has concluded, and that is that Shannan was murdered. Not just that she did not die of natural causes. Um, I won't be satisfied until they recognize that she was murdered, because she was. And the evidence is overwhelming of that fact. And the evidence does not exist of anything else but her murder. No natural causes exist as to her, as a cause of death or manner of death for Shannan Gilbert. Zero.
So I mean, it's interesting now that he's willing to come off of this if this can be pulled off, and it sounds like we're headed in that direction.
Well, we're working hard on it, and we've got new evidence just about once a day since the arrest of Uriman that comes into my office. A new witness, new facts, new evidence. It's remarkable how much there really is out there, and it's very widespread. It deals with not just the I shouldn't say just, but with the homicide of the four Gilgo girls, but also with Jessica Taylor, the very sad story of that girl, and the information we're getting on her keeps coming in to the benefit of the police ultimately. So we're a conduit, and rightfully so, and we'll continue to be. And it doesn't cost you a penny to talk to us.
No. Since the press conference, have you gotten even more information on it? Is that inspired? Because we know the police department, with Commissioner Harrison said, listen, if you don't want to talk to the police, call John Ray, call Crime Stoppers, or call somebody else. Have you seen any extra? Let's put it this way: interest from people getting involved.
I've seen a fairly intense amount of new interest in people getting involved. Other witnesses who've come forward. We have now yet another new witness, several new witnesses actually, but one of them appears to be a key witness. And as I said, we're not ready to do anything with that at this point. We're working with the police, and we'll see how that develops. But it looks like a pretty important new development. And there are others as well who verify many important pieces of evidence, some material even. And they're coming in, they're calling, they're texting, they're emailing. And I guess that's the way it should be.
Yep. So here's a comment from Serafina. Says, John Ray, I hope you received a lot of apologies for how people treated you during this whole time. You were fighting for Shannan all this time. So there's a lot of people in here that admire the work that you've done, your tenacity, and how you've kept your nose to the grind on this, and you really haven't lost focus of what you really wanted to accomplish here.
Well, that's really kind of people who think that and say that. And I forgive anybody who's ever insulted me for any insult. And when you hear the insults, they sting, all right. They sure do. But the idea is to keep your eye focused on what you're doing, and not let those kinds of armchair generals distract you from what you're doing. And I haven't. I still work really hard on this case, or cases now, and I don't pretend to be or pretend to be a police department by any stretch of the imagination, or even an investigator. But whatever role I play. Here it is. Take
Here's
this
a
one.
question. Here's a question from Brian Hardgrave. It says, "I'm missing how Rex could have been involved. Excuse me, with her death. I'm assuming it's Shannan the night she went missing. Is there anything that you can shed any light on that question? Is Rex directly, indirectly? I'm assuming that's the question that he's asking here.
That's a good question. It's the right question. Right now, the evidence is scant, but there's some instead of none. If I answered this question just a few weeks ago, I did answer it, and the answer was we had no evidence. Now we do. So what you do with that evidence is you follow it up. I don't know whether it'll take you anywhere or nowhere. Don't know yet. But there is new evidence and the one piece of evidence is the taxi driver's affidavit, her statements, where she places Shannan in a motel room with Rex Heuermann, and also identifies his vehicle. So that's, and then of course she also identifies him as someone who attacked her with a gun in his hand in her taxi, which, by the way, is consistent. That gun with 3 other witnesses that have come forward, the gun in hand, and Rex Heuermann. So that's just another path to go down. But yeah, that connects Shannan Gilbert. But there's another interesting, and it's only interesting at this point. Maybe more will come. I hope so. Maybe we invite you to call me if you hear. And that is this, that one of the items in the police inventory that's seized by the police and is reported in Newsday on 2 occasions was survivalist gear. Now, that's a specific kind of thing, survivalist gear. And interestingly, Rex has been identified by 2 different people wearing camouflage jackets, one when he was coming out of the preserve in Massapequa Park and chasing a girl on a bicycle, and the other one where the taxi driver goes to pick him up in Ronkonkoma, Bohemia area. And he's also, his home has survivalist gear, a very specific thing. And the interesting thing is that Dr. Charles Peter Hackett ran a company called Survivalist Dynamics. And he ran it with a fellow who was a sea captain, a former graduate or a graduate of the Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point. And you must imagine that people in that arcane group or that arcane pursuit, survivalism, they have magazines, they have websites, they have sites that they go on. They know one another. They get to know one another. It's a small circle. So there's a good chance that they knew each other, Hackett and Heuermann, and whoever else was involved with them. I mean, think about it. Think of people who collect things, for example. Nowadays, they get to know each other, right? Think of the people, for example, who collect child pornography, like Rex Heuermann. They get to know the other pornographers. They even meet them. They have groups that they join and so on. People in legitimate operations do the same. And after a while, everybody gets to know everybody. So those 2 facts join together, and they say, wait a minute, you got to look closer. Did these 2 know each other? And how did they know each other in this survivalist environment? An environment where you go in the woods, you're like a Boy Scout times 3, and you make survivalist huts, and you learn how to survive off of nature and the like. you're in marshes, and you're in forests where these girls were found. So it opens that door. And I think we have to go down that door and hope that some of the people involved in that movement will remember some of the people from back then who were in it.
Speaking of doors, I want to go back to just something you said a little before. There is an allegation that Rex was chasing a woman out of Massapequa Preserve.
Yes, there was an
Did I get
allegation.
that right?
Yes, you did. You heard it right. There was a young girl who was riding her bicycle, and Ureman would accost her in the Massapequa Park Preserve over there. I'm not sure if it's the Takapusha Reserve, but
Yeah, that's Tekapushi down.
yeah. And uh, it's a lovely place, but wooded and treed and with little paths. And he first would talk to her dressed in his camouflage, and he seemed to be very yeah, weathered, shall I say, as she described him in some fashion. And then he would emerge again. When she would ride on further on, he would pop up in another place. And he did it enough that it scared the daylights out of her. And she went home and told her parents. So, and he was dressed in a camouflage jacket, exactly like he was dressed for the taxi cab driver.
Well, that's definitely interesting. So, yeah, just on the other site that we run the show on, it says Mr. Ray has tenacity with style, and then Susan Jason says, "Mr. Ray, I love your polka dot tie. You're a real trendsetter." So, I actually held a poll. I said, "Is John going to wear something fancy for us tonight?" So you didn't disappoint. So I think we had like 96 people voted, and I think 95 of them said yes, he was going to wear something stylish tonight. So that's pretty interesting.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. It's nice. At least you're paying attention, right? And I get your is that's part of the deal, isn't it?
Yes, pretty much. Yes, it's very difficult, even years later, to turn any of that stuff off. As you know, it is what it is. You get trained, you can do it every day, and then all of a sudden, people think they can just turn it off, and you can't.
You can't.
So that's pretty much on that part. So let's talk about the taxi driver, because here we have somebody that doesn't have anything kind of in respect to saying come forward or not come forward. So she comes forward after these years. And one, did you find in some of these cases where it takes so long for people to come forward, is this that there was something holding them back, whether it was fear, or maybe in this case that she didn't want to get involved because she was worried about losing her job or something like that? Has anybody?
Yeah, the people who have come forward each have their own particular reasons for not having done so before, and each one of them in their own right makes sense. Fear is a real factor. Embarrassment is another. Humiliation is another. That syndrome of PTSD is yet another. These are things that one woman won't come forward and give a state. She gave me statements, but she won't give an affidavit because she's no longer in the business and she doesn't want her family to see it. So there are perfectly rationally good reasons for them not having done so. In the taxi driver's case, she did come forward, but in an informal way. She had no great faith in the police department. And so she told her cousin, who was a police officer. She told her family members. She told the other drivers all about it. So she had reason to tell others, but she didn't formally file a complaint until finally she felt compelled enough to have done so. And her calls were not returned after she called Crime Stoppers. So she called me. Each one has their own story, a similar story. Is that of the various witnesses I've talked to? I mean, and the fear that somebody's going to hurt them now, if they're identified, come forward. These people haven't been inactive in making threats and taunts. Look at what Rex did in calling Melissa Barthelomy's family and the horrible filth that he told the half sister of Melissa. And look what's happened to we've had some very serious, bizarre events occurring to my family that should never have occurred. That were pretty taunting and pretty worrisome. So yeah, coming forward has an element of fear, but these people overcame that, and rightfully so. And I've kept my word to them. I haven't revealed their names.
Right, so Shannon from Connecticut says she finds the taxi driver story very compelling. I think many of us do because of the not only the descriptions that you give, but I guess a lot of people are struggling with that. And it says, what's the chances of running into Rex twice, right? Once at the bar and then once at the motel, which I want to talk about too.
Well, the chances are not so hard to think of. The taxi cab business is a fairly small group of people in that area, around Ronkonkoma, Bohemia, Sayville, that whole South Shore, Middle Island, South Shore area, in Brookhaven Town in Suffolk County, and or Islip Town, depending on which part you're talking about. But it's relatively small. So the chances are pretty good that could happen by chance. But I don't think it did, and the taxi driver doesn't think it did. She believes firmly that he hunted her down, that he found her, because she had seen him at the motel with Shannon. And so he wanted to intimidate her and threaten her, and he tracked it down. And it's not hard to do. You could call a taxi cab company and say, listen, I just had this driver, or last week I had such and such a driver. I'd like to use her again. You'll get it. And that could have been what happened. We don't know, but that's one theory that the driver herself has. Makes sense as well. And another thing to remember is that Rex has a proclivity for hunting down people that he doesn't like. There's another thing is I think it needs to be examined whether or not Rex himself was a taxi driver at one point in his life, back in the early part of his career, which would take you back to the 1990s. We have some evidence that that's true. So there are things like that which are out there. There's another witness who says that he was a taxi driver himself. So there's more to it than I guess I can talk about.
Right.
But there is more to it. And considering the way he behaved in that taxi, remember the witnesses that are coming to me don't talk to each other. They don't know each other, and they're not revealed. They all get revealed at once. So they can't corroborate their stories in advance. And in her story and in the other witnesses' stories, two other witnesses' stories, he's got a handgun, and he makes threatening remarks in the car with these other people, always with a handgun, and the remarks are similar, and they're accompanied by an excited violence. It's very, very hard to imagine that these women looking at this giant, this ungentle giant in their car, would not remember those facts or remember his face.
I have a question here from Peter Prenzo. He says, does John have anything new about the former Chief James Burke? We know he's the gift that keeps on giving these days. He's got a court case, I know, on November 3rd. I'm surprised they have given him this many court cases for this. I mean, this thing just keeps on going.
Well, you shouldn't be surprised at the number of days that he's had. That's fairly standard when you're charged with misdemeanors or felonies, that you get several times in court before the final result comes. That's fairly average. Okay. Nothing there that's off. But what he's charged with makes a huge difference in the evaluation of the police regime as it existed when Burke first became important in the ranks of the police until his demise in 2015, around that time. Remember, he wasn't just the chief of police that he becomes after this investigation of Gilgo had already commenced, but he was the chief of detectives for the DA's office, who was also looking into this case when it first started. And before that, he was an important figure rising up through the police department. To me, the fact that he rose up in the police department in the bizarre way that he did, when he starts out as a witness in a murder case where he's really himself complicit, in that he knew things, about what happened, or he said he did, and testified about it after a fashion. He didn't come forward and call up the police and say, guess what? I know this little boy, my neighbor, was killed by having rocks shoved down his throat. He didn't do that. So he's not a nice guy from the beginning. And for him to rise up nonetheless, and it's not Spoda who could have made him move all the way through the ranks all by himself, because Spoda didn't control the police department when Spoda was a defense attorney. So how did Burke move up? In the police hierarchy, they had to move him up. They had to. And for that to happen, when he gets busted in rank twice for his association with Larita Rickenbacker, who was a sex worker and later became my client, so I know a lot about the inner workings there of him and her. How could that happen? Under those circumstances, how did he nonetheless get pushed up? Was he that ingenious, this high school graduate? I kind of doubt it. But what else could have moved him up? But somebody that was acting in like kind with him, in conjunction with his behaviors. There's corruption in that police department at the top and in the middle ranks moving up. There was real moral corruption, and the corrupt people pushed him ahead. There has to be. I can't see it any other way. And that has never been examined carefully enough to see who the real culprits were. I remember when Spoda testified and 3 high-ranking, white shirts testified, and all 3 of them were in adulterous relationships and had to admit it. Do you think maybe Burke had certain things on other people that helped him to move up as well? Or that they all were moving in conjunction with one another? And now we know that that kind of sexual impropriety didn't just involve women, and Burke being voracious in consuming women when he could, but in consuming men as well. When he offered to give oral sex to a man up on the hill, in Bald Hill, notorious place for that, it opened the door for me to wonder all the way back to the Pius case, are there other facts that have been overlooked in the entire history of that period of time regarding Pius and the reason he was killed, and regarding, after that, all the things that Burke did and failed to do when it came to this investigation. There's much more in that, much more.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. And I was telling, so a couple of people asked some questions in here because we don't have a lot of time left. But in regards to the hotel, my buddy Jay and his wife went out there to the Sayville Motor Lodge. Do you know exactly where, what room was, where this was located in regards to when she saw it that night? Because they showed everybody how it was. Because I tried to explain it that you just pull right up to these rooms. Because people were saying, like, how do they know which, flashing the lights in the car at the room? How do you know? And this and that. But I tried to explain to people that it's just one row of long motel rooms. Did they have an exact location?
I don't know if they had the exact room, but the motel is broken up into 2 long strips with a management center in the middle, and it stretches along the southern part of Sunrise Highway in Sayville. And the taxi driver was able to point out the actual side, which one of the 2 pieces she drove up to and flashed her lights. She was able to recall that, and she was also able to identify the side street where Uhrman's vehicle was parked. She knew all of that. She also, by the way, had gone in herself to complain to the manager, a woman of India who was running the place at the time and still did right up until it got busted. She was able to complain to that person about the treatment of Shannan, and she did. So she was able to identify that as well, and she could describe for the police exactly what she saw. So, and this is a woman who no longer lives anywhere near that. She doesn't live in New York.
If there's somebody watching that want to know what this place looks like, just go over to the Shaming of Jay's YouTube page. He's got a whole video on that entire thing, so you can just answer questions.
Yeah,
so
just
the last couple.
This got busted by Rodney. He took it down as a place of prostitution. So,
yep, and it's actually working out pretty good between Harrison, between Toulon, and about the debriefing of sex workers and everything else that goes along with it. You can, gather some information. In the last minute or so that we have left with you, John, is there anything that you want to add in tonight that we didn't get a chance to talk about, or?
probably hours of things. We're going to be holding a symposium of sorts, a presentation, which we're planning for November right now, early November, to which everybody's invited, where we're going to lay out our evidence regarding this entire case as we have it, as we know it, and as to Shannan Gilbert's disappearance. So we'll give you the venue in short order when we get it exactly pinned down. I've got to pay for it. It's not cheap. So we're trying to do that and get that set up. So you'll have a better chance to hear more. And that will be a 3-hour event. So we'll go into great, rich detail, and hopefully we'll keep it interesting for 3 hours. But we'll be thorough for sure. And I want to, hey, Joe Jackalone, you're a great cop. You're a great guy. I'm glad I met you, and I think you're doing a great thing for everybody. You're the man.
I appreciate that, John, but thank you for coming on and sharing your time. I mean, you can be doing whatever you want to be doing instead of spending it with us, but we appreciate that all. And everybody in the chats here loves you. I'll send you the link, and you can read all the comments that they have. But
Well,
once again,
I'm going to do that, and I drink Lambrusco on Friday, so that's what I'm going to do.
Good. You can have one on me too.
All right, I will.
So, all right. So everybody, we want to thank John for spending another hour with us. Actually, hour plus right now. We're up. So we will talk to you soon, and you guys have a great night and stay safe. And John, thanks again. We'll speak soon.
My pleasure. Bye now.